In the 16th century, Spain and Portugal established dominance in that part of the New World that became known as Latin America. Brazil belonged to the Portuguese, and the Spanish crown controlled the rest of Central and South America. The European conquest cut short the further independent development of the Indian peoples. How Spain and Portugal exploited their colonies in Latin America. What were the characteristics of the development of Latin American culture, and what was the situation of various categories of the Latin American population? All life in the colonies was subordinated to the interests of the metropolises. The Spaniards discovered rich deposits of silver and gold in South America, and the mining industry began to develop rapidly, becoming a source of precious metals. In the latifundia, they cultivated cotton, tobacco, cane sugar, and rice. The royal power did not allow the cultivation of those agricultural crops that were produced in Europe: grapes, olives, and flax. The manufacturing industry in the colonies almost did not develop. The privileged elite of the colony was made up of the Spaniards and the Portuguese. They occupied almost all administrative, military, and church positions and owned large estates and mines. The Spaniards and Portuguese considered themselves a superior race compared to the local population. They even treated the Creoles, the descendants of Europeans, with disdain. The Creoles occupied secondary positions in the colonial administration and army. The intelligentsia and lower clergy were formed from their ranks. The Creoles owned mines and manufactories. Among them were also small landowners and artisans. They had equal rights with the Saracens, but in fact, they were discriminated against only as an exception. They were appointed to the highest positions. At the same time, the Creoles were treated with contempt. They treated the Indians and generally considered people of color to be inferior races. European colonizers robbed and exterminated the local population by decree of King Charles V. The pagan Indians were declared hereditary slaves of the Spanish colonizers, as described in Bartolomeo Schazos's book, History of India. They placed cruel overseers over all important jobs, including those sent to work in the mines and those working on estates or farms. These overseers treated them so harshly, cruelly, and inhumanely, giving them no peace day or night, that they resembled servants of hell. Hundreds of thousands of Indians died from back-breaking labor on plantations. In the mines, hunger and disease caused the Indian population to decline catastrophically due to a labor shortage. Slaves from Africa began to be imported to America. In Brazil, for example, they constituted the bulk of direct producers in the Spanish colonies. The Indians remained the primary labor force. Africans were used primarily on plantations. Sugar cane, coffee, tobacco, and other tropical crops, as well as in the mining industry, in addition to Indians, Africans, and colonists of European descent, mestizos, mulattoes, and Sambos also lived in Latin America in the 18th century. Discontent with the colonial regime intensified in Latin America. Mass uprisings of Indians and slaves from Africa took place. The Creole bourgeoisie, influenced by the European Enlightenment, joined the struggle. The Creoles demanded equal rights with the Spaniards and participation in the governance of the colonies until their separation from the metropolis. In 1791, an uprising of African slaves broke out in the western part of the island of Haiti, which belonged to France. As a result of the victory of the San Domingo rebels, the independent Republic of Haiti was proclaimed. Latin America stood on the threshold of liberation revolutions. European conquerors mercilessly destroyed the fruits of ancient American culture. The Catholic Church justified such destructive actions, while priests and missionaries introduced local, the population was converted to the Christian religion and the spread of European culture. The monastic orders of the Franciscans, Dominicans, and Jesuits played a major role in this process. One of these priests was Bartolomé Las Casas, an outstanding humanist scholar and member of the Dominican order. The more he became acquainted with the lives of the peoples of the West Indies, the more he became imbued with their concerns. Las Casas believed it was necessary to preserve the national traditions of the Indians and the power of their leaders. He repeatedly defended the interests of the Indians before the king, but in the last years of his life he was finally convinced that he would not be able to help them. Bartolomé Las Casas retained many followers, Christian humanists who fought for the freedom of the Indians and the preservation of their culture. Thanks to the activities of Catholic missionaries in Latin America, various educational institutions were created that are now considered among the best. The first art schools in Latin America became the monastery of Quito, now the capital of Ecuador. In 1522, a special college was opened under it. The training of local artists was so successful that by the end of the 16th century, thanks to the efforts of the Franciscan monks, the monasteries some developed into genuine centers of art. Such schools, attached to Franciscan monasteries, existed throughout America until the early 19th century. The indigenous population of Latin America gradually became familiar with the achievements of Western European civilization, but European culture was also influenced by the traditions of the peoples of ancient America. The synthesis of European and New World culture contributed to the development of a new Latin American culture. An outstanding representative of the Criollo culture was Juana Inés de la Cruz, or Sor Juana. Christian ideas became widespread in the literature of the New World, and they were clearly manifested in painting and sculpture. Images of Christ and the saints acquired new features in Latin America, distinct from European concepts. The image of the Mother of God became especially beloved. Various monastic art schools, strongly influenced by ancient Indian traditions, depicted the Virgin Mary in different ways. She was often depicted in the robes of an Indian princess, bathed in the rays of the sun. With a kind and gentle face and slender hands, the Virgin Mary's clothing always featured white and blue colors. There was a lot of gold trim on her dress. Especially among the masters of Ecuador, gold work brought them worldwide fame. When creating cities in the New World, Europeans used the concepts developed by the architects of the Italian Renaissance, the experience of the ancient Greeks and Romans, and also relied on local traditions. Construction was based on a rectangular planning system. 8 streets branched off from the main square, 2 from each corner of the street, and all city buildings were oriented to the cardinal points. A similar rectangular city layout was used by the Mayans, Incas, and other peoples of the continent. Construction of main squares began with a Catholic church. The second side of the square was built up. The city government buildings were erected on the 3rd floor, the military erected their buildings on the 4th floor, the governor's house was then built, a school was then supposed to be built, but there was often insufficient funds for this, and therefore the church took over the care of education. Thus, the European conquests interrupted the independent development of the Indian peoples of Central and South America. A new culture emerged, based on the labor and creative activity of the Creole Indians and Africans. The Catholic Church played an important role in the development of this culture.